I'm Natasha Ryan with the North Group, and we are here for our podcast, Time to Head North. Very great to have Desi Mayner on with us today. Steve Hernandez downstairs, our CEO. Mayner Leadership, Desi heads up, is the president of. Now, I'm going to take a different role during this podcast, okay? We talk with security leaders in our industry on all sorts of topics, but today, because Steve is such good friends with Desi, Steve, I'm handing the moderating reins over to you, and I will intervene as necessary. But I think you two are such good pals. I don't think I have a lot of work to do today. So I'm going to let you kick off this conversation that is going to center around personal growth in our business lives and resilience, which I've seen you demonstrate, sir, in the North Group. So, just kind of start off with what you want to do first. What question you want to start out with?
Well, first off, I think everybody needs to know who Desi is, because he is an incredible person with an incredible story, and the man is on an incredible mission, which I am in 110% support of. So, Desi, tell the world who you are.
Yeah, well, hey, thanks a lot for having me on. First of all, I think this is going to be a fun conversation. But hey, I'm Desi Mayner, owner-operator of Mayner Leadership. It's something that I created out of thin air. And a little bit of the backstory behind that is I was a teacher and a coach. I was a special education teacher for 10 years, a sports coach. I was a Division I athlete. So when I looked at what do I want to do when this tragedy hit my life, and what that was is that within about 18 months, the first two bad things had ever happened to me in my life happened really close together. And what it is, I lost my grandfather, and then I lost my father. My grandfather we expected, but it was honestly the first bad thing that had ever happened to me in my life. I was very blessed up until then. 18 months later, I lost my dad completely unexpectedly. And that threw me for a loop. That took me into exactly what we're going to talk about today, which is personal growth, down a road of kind of searching and seeking what's next for me. And dissecting my grandpa's life and my dad's life and how they were leaders. And I finally, had a conversation with my wife and said, what is it that I'm going to do? Because I'm getting these strong feelings that I'm not supposed to be teaching anymore. Right. And she said, well, why don't you do what you've been doing your whole life, which is lead people. I've either been in front of a classroom, the captain of a sports team, a department head, whatever it is, we've been leading people. Right. And one of the things that my grandpa and my dad taught me was in sports. And it was like, the game doesn't matter, the people do. So it's like, I used to say, maybe overconfidently so, like I could coach a tennis team because the sport doesn't matter, the people do, the team do. If you could teach people how to win, then the game doesn't matter. So that's how I approach it in business now. So that's where Mayner Leadership was kind of born from, is out of legacy. Right, is out of a legacy of my grandfather, of my dad, and for me to pass down to my 3- and 5-year-old daughters, of leading people well, leading teams well, and trying to change people's lives so they're not victims of their business, so they're not victims of the everyday world of, I work 9 to 5, I come home, I kick my dog, I eat dinner, wake up and go on an hour subway ride and do it again. Like, that sucks. No one should have to do that. So I'm all about living a life of achievement and fulfillment. And the reason that I do that is because my grandpa had one and my dad had the other. Neither of them had both. My grandpa was very fulfilled in what he did, right? Very involved in the church. My dad was very good at what he did, and he was very successful, but not fulfilled because he was working for the man, right? So I say, screw that, let's do both. And that's where Mayner Leadership is on the mission to do with leaders, with teams, changing the corporate world, letting the tail wag the dog almost in how we change, how we look at things, and how we lead people, and how we treat employees to get higher retention and higher employee engagement, because they're people. And if we can create stronger people, we can create stronger communities, stronger families, and maybe we can move the needle on this country just a little bit and make us a little bit stronger. So that was a very long-winded answer to your simple
Loved
question,
it
Steve.
though. Loved it.
No, it's amazing, and Desi, you're kind of one of the top 5 inspirations as far as folks in my life, because you bring up a very good point. And I when I started off in business, right, there's a lot I didn't know, more that I didn't know than I did.
Mhm.
And it was a constant struggle to evolve who I needed to be post military and post. I mean, a lot of us, we go into the military and then we come out and we spend our entire career being told what to wear, what time to be there, and what we're doing, and then it all stops. Right? Nobody's telling you anymore, and now it's up to you to figure it out. And
Yeah.
that's why we see a lot of our brothers and sisters go down a pretty unfair rabbit hole, right?
Mhm.
And the other notion is that the world owed me something, and I had to come through that journey. And a lot of my hardship has been, and it's been a rough go being an entrepreneur, right? From trying to figure out how to navigate relationships, um, to making the right decisions for the organization,
Mhm.
to work life balance, which we've talked about on here, to I'm so focused. Being a husband and a father, you have an obligation. Being a business owner, you have, in my opinion, a equal obligation to a lot more folks, depending on the
Yeah.
size of your organization. And then
Mhm.
you have to try to balance between that, right? And it's interesting because one of the things that I see, especially with myself, is I let things hit me pretty hard sometimes.
Mhm.
And whether it be failure, doubt, fear, I'm not bulletproof to any of that. And I'm open to have a conversation about it, because I know that is a path, to resilience, right? To overcome it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and I think it's interesting because the first step of the conversation is to discuss the problem.
Yeah. And the even further, the root of the problem.
Yeah. So I mean, let's I'll be the guinea pig with this, right? Because I don't want to call anybody else out, but when I have issues, right? Kind of an older me used to use just frustration and anger, and not understanding direction as a result of not understanding the strategy behind, because I just, why aren't you figuring it out? Why aren't you loyal to this mission or this endeavor?
Yeah.
And it's crazy because I I'm super blessed to have failed in certain areas and been able to look at that. But when you're leading people and you have folks in your organization that aren't following,
Mhm.
or it's either a failure of you or a failure of the right person being in the organization. I mean, how do you see leaders deal with that?
Well, I think the first thing is, like I said, go back to the root. And people are always gonna follow the person before the vision. Like they'll buy in with the vision, but they're gonna follow that leader first. And I think a lot of that has to do with their overall presence, how they communicate, right? How they carry themselves. I think consistency is really, really important. I think consistency is one of the best ways to attack resilience. I just continue to show up, right? But really, when it talks about people, they don't ever, and this is cliche. I want to say John Maxwell said this, but like, they don't care about what you know or what your vision until they understand that you care about them.
Wow.
And at the end of the day, like that's what leadership is. We want to grow a big company. We want to do some great things. All of those things are going to require a whole lot more than just yourself or one person.
Yeah, that's impactful, right? And again, I mean, I can tell you that my journey in entrepreneurship, because again, I don't want to reference anyone else, but my journey, right, was shrouded in always trying to figure it out to a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think it's really important when we fail at something, we own it, right?
Absolutely.
And then moving through that to when your leadership team fails at something,
Mm-hmm.
you own it. And I think, two things. I think matters of perspective don't get addressed, right? And I think that,
Huge.
I mean, there's some relationships in my life that I wish I would have addressed things differently, but I didn't know how. I'd never
Yeah.
been in that situation before, and right, and when everything, up till that point in your life is a nail, you're a hammer, right? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and that's your defense mechanism. How do we break down those barriers of especially in our industry, right? Natasha will attest to this. This
Mm-hmm.
high, industry that we're in, right? You have to break down barriers of humility. You have to break down barriers of ego.
Oh yeah.
And I've had to break those barriers down with me. I've had to just shut up and listen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hear. How do you self-identify this? I mean, give us some, because I know you got some great processes behind
Yeah.
this, some other stuff we're working on. Talk through that, because I think self-identification from the leadership standpoint of
Mm-hmm.
where can I do better? Where can I grow? Because if you're not growing, you're not going to grow your team.
Yeah, well, I think one of the first ones is when you look at, a business owner and you look at your leadership team, people do what people see. Like you've heard the old adage of like, do what I say, not what I mean, or do what I mean, not what I say. But the same comes true with behavior. If you're frustrated with your leadership team, you trained them and taught them and conditioned them to behave that way.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're frustrated, take a look in the mirror because you're the one that taught them how to do that.
100%.
Right. And that's a hard truth. But at the end of the day, the question is like, do you want to get better or not? How's that working for you? So one of my favorite things to do is we ask the people around the leader or the leadership team, hey, what's going on? What is the best environment for this leader? What should they start, stop, or do more of or do less of? What brings out the worst in this team or this leader? Right. And we bring the truth. We get to the bottom of it. You talked about perspective. We need to get all of the perspectives because sometimes we're the boss. And that means that we define our leadership because we have a big company. So we're a good leader. No, you don't define your leadership. The people that you lead do.
How does it fare when someone fails? How does it fare, and how should it be addressed when someone fails to recognize what gets said about them?
Like they're basically, you're saying they're delusional in their thinking when they hear the truth.
No, not delusional, but delusion. I think that's mental illness, right? So now you're going down a whole nother road, right? If they're delusional, right, and don't want to accept, but when you have an issue, and again, I'll speak from experience, right? I've had past situations where people they didn't want to get on the bus. There were times where I didn't even know what the bus needed to look like, right? And I didn't know if we were driving it off a cliff or but that's part of the risk of entrepreneurship, right? There's a season, there's seasons, but how do you differentiate between the season of go and the season of strategy and the season of build and the season of development? I mean, because they're seasons. So how do we differentiate between them? Because I think for me, I think you get lost in build.
Mm-hmm.
And then you in building the business is different than growing the business, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you differentiate between those two and when to focus here and when to focus there?
Well, I absolutely agree that there are seasons, but I also would say that the concept and culture of continuous improvement as far as behavior is a season that never should end. That should always be going. Right now, if we wear different hats in the business and things like that, yeah, sometimes we got to grow the people, sometimes we got to build the business. But when it comes to leadership development or growing a team or uniting the team, like the culture of feedback, right, and suggestions all around behavior and the culture of continuous improvement should never stop. That should always be there. That should just be a piece of the culture, right? Not just the culture, because the culture is huge and has 1,000 variables, but it should be a piece of that culture all of the time. But I think what it comes down to is when you talk about those seasons, is how to identify which season you're in. Is where are you at on your plan? What are your goals? Just like we set a behavior goal, are we in an area where we're looking at succession? Are we in an area where we're setting up for a sale? Or are we in an area where we're looking at accelerated growth? Or are we in an area where, man, stuff's not going too good. We just need to button down the hatches and fill the holes. Yeah. Right. So it's really, really, it's going to be one of those 4 buckets.
What's funny is you talk about feedback, and I think back to, all the jobs I've had, like primarily in the news business. That's where I have spent mm-hmm. most of my career. And the jobs I enjoyed the most were both good and bad feedback, just getting feedback, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're so desperate as, if you're an ambitious person, you want to constantly grow, get better at what you do. And when there's that lack of feedback, you feel completely stifled. And I think the best leaders are the leaders that give constant feedback. And if it is negative, not just instituting negative feedback, but then coming up with a way to help you grow so that the next feedback can be more positive. So I think feedback is absolutely pivotal.
Well, and that's that suggestion piece that you're talking about. Yeah. Like, hey, feedback is great, but like, I'm not just a punching bag, like help me.
Right.
So like, okay, you gave me the feedback. Thank you. Right. And that's important to always say thank you, whether it's good, bad, whether you disagree, always say thank you, right? Thank you, Natasha, for that feedback. Right. Now, based on that feedback, what suggestions do you have for me to become a better communicator, for me to become better at delegation? Because like now I'm just left with this story in my head that I already struggle with it. So by you giving me feedback, telling me about it, like you didn't give me any tools, especially how to do it better with you specifically. So that's where those suggestions become really, really important. But that's not going to happen like right away. The first time you ask someone for feedback and suggestions, they're going to be guarded.
Yes.
Right? Whoa, hold on here. Right? You're going to have to build that you keep asking, And it's not like, oh man, I'm getting sent to the principal's office, right? It needs to be like, no, we do this on a regular basis. It's part of what we do and how we grow together. Right? I think a business of the team that grows together will yield results. If the people grow together, the business will also.
I think it's interesting, right? Because you bring up a very good point, right? I got to reference starting out in business, right? There's starting out, there's being established, there's growth curves. I think consistency, you said, is important, right? But for me, I talk to a lot of folks that are in business and entrepreneurs and stuff, and I hear, I'm starting out, I can't get this this team to lead. I can't, I went through that. I went through trying to find purpose within what we were doing. And we've always known what we're doing. We've always known how to do what we're doing. But are we doing it together? Are we rowing the boat at the same time? When we hit a wave, are we all rowing to get over that wave? And who's in the boat and who's not? Don Miller talks about this quite a bit. Who's in the boat? Who is in your boat and who's rowing towards success? And, empowering, one of the things that I think is really important is empowering the result of growth versus the growth, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going here to get here to do this, so that we can do X. It's funny because I find myself tending get so, working on the business that I lose focus of what's going on in the business sometimes.
Yeah.
And then if I get in the business, I lose focus on working on the business. So it's this paradigm, this balance that has to happen, right? Where, and then, it's hard because I've also realized that you can't be friends with your employees to a certain extent, right? Like there has to be, it takes a unique individual on both ends of that to be able to let people in. And then when you let people in and you get burned or there's a misperception or there's a lack thereof, it's just kind of one of these things where there is so much struggle in the entrepreneurship and the business leadership kind of silo that you have to have thick skin, you have to be resilient, right? And you have to be able to pick up and move on. My question for you is, when you have a situation where you're trying to grow and you're hitting a roadblock, what do you tell leaders to do on an immediate front and then a secondary front and then say a tertiary front? I mean, what's your advice initially there?
Let me clarify the question. What's my advice when a leadership team is hitting roadblocks in kind of like steps 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah.
Perfect. So step 1 is, I call this kind of the war room, is we're going to come together and we're going to figure out on a very simple scale, red, yellow, green. Right. So say we bring in a C-suite, we got the CMO, the CFO, the COO, the CEO. I'm going to go around each department and I'm going to say, in your department, red, yellow, green. But the truth is what is the most important, right? So if it's red, now we understand we have something we need to address immediately, right? Yellow, I'm doing okay, but I need help with one tiny specific thing, right? Green, all systems a go, right? So when we have a red situation, right, that's when we come in and we say, okay, what exactly is wrong? What's the roadblock? Because you go all the way back. You need to identify the problem. And then when you prioritize, because what you have there is a constraint. So you need to exploit the constraint, right? You need to shine the light on what that is. And then that becomes top priority, whatever that constraint is. Exploiting it, that becomes top priority. And how we solve it and what we do is we need to gain a perspective from everyone in the room. Right? Anyone that is part of that team that is a stakeholder in that situation, right? That we trust their opinion and that we're going to listen to it. We need to gain all of those perspectives, right? And we need to get a laundry list of how we can destroy this bottleneck, right? Because that's exactly what that is.
Do you think that when you find, and I want to pivot here from kind of leadership and business ownership to just people that are struggling, right? I personally, right, I know I tend to put a mask on, right? And I've done it over the years. Natasha puts a mask on, right? We try to, you do it. We all tend to do it with certain things in our life because we don't want to make it somebody else's problem or we don't know how to address it. I am unbelievably blessed to have a great leadership team and a great support team and mentors, but I've sought that out, right? I've sought that. Yeah. What do I do when this? Who do I talk to when this happens, right? Yep. But how do you? People that are just struggling. Breaking down a process for not only communication to work through, but I have found that time is extremely important. I am the type of person that does not want to take time. I want to address the issue, right? I don't like time.
100%. Yes.
Don't go to bed angry, right? Don't address it. Talk till 2 a.m. to figure it out. Because if I don't figure it out, then I dwell on it, and it consumes.
It eats you alive.
Yeah. So Natasha's the same way. I'm sure you're the same way. I think a lot of not to say we're high functioning, but I think high functioning, high emotionally driven people are that way, right? We're naturally gravitated towards, we want to make it better. I want to fix what we did wrong. Help me understand how I fix that. So when people are struggling, what is your advice individually for them to address these issues?
Well, I think that all three of us on this call have a similar personality. And that's more of a dominant type of personality. So I think that depends on who you're talking to, because there's 4 types of personalities, right? Dominant, influence, steady, and conscientious or compliant. And, a steady or conscientious compliance personality, they're going to want more time to think about that and to vet it out, to think it through, to process it, where that might drive the 3 of us nuts, right? And that's going to absolutely drive us crazy. I want to go now. This is a problem, fix it. Like 1 + 1 = 2, right? But they're like, I need 24 hours, I need 10 hours, whatever it is, right? But I think that is where it starts. Is self-awareness is a superpower. We need to understand ourselves, how we're wired, how we tick, and why we tick that way. And when we know that, we'll know how to leverage our strengths and overcome our weaknesses. Because so many of us as leaders, as team members, as people in general, do not understand our own self and our own emotional intelligence, right? I'm pissed. Okay, why? Because my dad used to yell at me about the same thing, right?
Yeah.
That and those types of things. So if we don't understand who we are, why we tick, what motivates us, what our ideal environment is, like, we're just kind of winging it all the time.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson?
I am, yes.
I love him, and I read his books, and I follow him, pretty regularly. And he talks a lot about the inability for people to communicate when we have problems with one another. And I think the more and more and more I see this, whether it's cancel culture, whether it's negative relationships, toxic relationships, whatever it is, I feel like I know I let some of those things, I used to at least get to me to a point where it would, I would start questioning things, right? And I've had to find a resilience in my frame of reference, right, of how I view my next action to the problem. But in today's world, where you've got TikTok, you've got social media, you've got the public opinions, you've got everybody wanting to give their 2 cents on what they think or what they feel based on X, Y, or Z. I think a lot of us take that in, and we take it hurtful when someone doesn't like us, or someone doesn't want to follow us, and it's hard, right? It's hard to please everyone.
You're not gonna.
No, you're not, and you can't.
And if you are, you're probably not doing everything you should be, quite frankly.
Yeah, or you're not playing a big enough game.
Yeah.
Boom. And I think that's really important, right? Like if you are just comfortable, and you don't have any haters out there, right?
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson talks about this, right? If there's nobody hating you, then you need to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And Joe Rogan says it, all these guys talk about that is be disruptive. Go and disrupt communities, the world, your market, your business, your arena that you're in, right? The man in the arena, right? Are you disruptive?
Oh, great quote. Love that one.
Right.
Yeah, we learned that early on in the news business.
Yeah, I bet.
If everybody loves you and there's no like, what did she say? What does she challenge it? Like, you're not doing something right. You got to get a thick skin pretty early on in that career. So,
so I think empowering. I mean, one of the things that I want to see in some of the stuff we're working on is I want to empower people to be disruptive. I want to empower people to work through pain, suffering, hardship, stress, whatever, be disruptive, and show the people that have something to say about you, give them something to talk about.
Yeah. I think it comes down to where people struggle with this is that they don't know they've never dug into themselves and like why they exist. Like two most important days in life, right? The day you're born, the day you figure out why. And I walk people through, like, I call it 7 layers, right? Now, I'm not the one who invented it, but it's super powerful. But I mean, I'll go 13 layers deep. But when you really know why you exist, like, you will figure out the mission that is so powerful that you don't care. I don't care what people think of me. This is my mission because this is why I exist. I exist to believe in and challenge people. I don't care how successful or big of a failure they are. They need to get better for themselves, for their family, for their community, for the world. It doesn't matter to me. Therefore, I don't care what you think of me because that's why I live. When people have that, they don't care, and that will disrupt things.
And folks, that's called purpose, right? That's purpose.
That's exactly what that is.
That's purpose. And I've got a dear friend, and I can say that I've learned a lot about my own purpose from him. And iron sharpens iron here. I don't think you can find another way to better yourself and find your purpose, grow your purpose. I've learned, and believe it or not, I think it's Kanye West, who I don't necessarily want to quote here, but
are we quoting Kanye? Is that what this?
Wow, that was a curveball, Steve.
Yeah, he said, I don't care who hates me. That just means they have nothing better to do. And it's like, wait a minute. When you're struggling, your enemy, the enemy, will come at you in what I like to call phases of 3, right? There'll be 3 situations, 3 people, 3 instances that'll just try to cut you down further and further and further. Yeah. And it's why I think a lot of deaths happen in 3s, right? You're like, wait a minute, because I think we tend to have a ill perspective on the things that happen in our life, and I want to bring this up because it's really important that because a deal didn't happen, it may have led me to another situation in my life that was better for me. Mm-hmm. And I think we go back to perspective in the beginning, right? That perspective has driven me to a whole nother level of thinking. Yeah. And I think that's important to what you're saying here, because if everything is a negative and there's no positive second or third order effect to what happened, then you will live your life in a negative state of mind. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so absolutely.
People that say went from positive or are just in that negative state of mind, I'd like to close with, how do they get out of that? How do they seek help? How do they find positivity when you feel like, the last thing to die is hope, right? So yeah. So how do you find hope and positivity?
But Steve, can I interject? Is it positivity per se, or when you're in that struggle and finding that moment of pain, and pain point is what I'm talking about, whatever that looks like, is it positivity or is it finding the lesson in it? Is it whatever you believe in? I believe in God, what God is trying to teach you in that moment. Yeah. And learning from it to move forward. I don't know that in my pain moments, it's necessarily finding positivity as much as it, for me at least, it's like, what is he trying to tell me so that I can learn from this painful situation I'm in?
Yeah, I think it's.
I didn't mean to hijack your question, Steve. That's just my.
No, I think it's yes and.
I think that's.
I think that to answer your question, Steve, I think you need to ask yourself, better off, have someone more objective ask you, what's really important to you? And then when you answer that, have them ask why. And then when you answer that, have them ask why. And then rinse and repeat that until you start crying, basically. And you will have found what you're passionate about. Jeez. One time it took me 27 layers to do that with someone, right? But they got to be willing to get real with themselves. And that's where we miss the mark. Yep. Is that we're unwilling to get real with ourselves, right? Go in a dark corner all by yourself and do it with a piece of paper. It won't be as effective, but if that's what it takes, right? But I think in There's an amazing book. There's an amazing book about this. It's called Why is Greater Than What. And I think you need to align the 3 P's in your life. Natasha, you talked about the pain, right?
Yep.
What pisses you off? What wakes you up at 3 a.m. crying,
Yep.
right? What do you lose sleep over? And then what I was talking about there is the why, which is your passion. What are you incredibly passionate about, right? And then what are you good at? Proficiency. What are you good at? And then how do you align those things? There is a sweet spot somewhere in there that aligns all 3 of those things, which is exactly what you were born to do.
Yeah, that's huge. That's
I mean, you
huge.
talk about resilience. Like, don't think like I quit teaching and cool, we started Mayner Leadership and now we're super successful. Like, no, I fell on my face for a long time. I had to sell my house. I'm tying on an old pair of boots, about to go swing a hammer, and my wife's like, I think we might have to sell the house. I mean, I was in all kinds of states building saunas and doing all these things, failed at a construction business, failed at a home inspection business. And I was like, I don't care. Something's going to work until I find my thing that aligns those 3 P's, and then it'll work, right? It'll be blessed once I get to that point in my life.
That is so important because I mean, you're speaking my walk here, right? You cannot quit. And I can't tell you how many days I've woke up and wanted to.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to quit business. I wanted to quit but then something always happens where there is a reward behind patience.
Mm-hmm.
There is a reward behind listening.
Yeah.
Right. There is pain to get to a positive point. And I'll challenge that, right? It is positivity and pain. We cannot see the forest through the trees here ever. And you're absolutely right that we need people in our lives to help us navigate that forest.
Yeah.
When it gets thick, right? You're in pickers and thickets, right? And you cannot see. It's pitch black. You don't know which way to go. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really, really, really important what you said, because it's, what is your why for me, right? Mm-hmm. What is your why? Why do you do what you do? I think it's also about, what do you believe? Mm-hmm. Right? We are nothing. You know, I equate this to, I am here to change the world, but it's not for me. It's not for money. It's not for fame or fortune. It's not for any of that. Yeah. It's to leave an impact. Mm-hmm. It's what will they say at my funeral? Yeah. What will my kids remember?
That one was really important to me. And I tell that lots. I remember standing up at my dad's funeral as like the new patriarch of the family, basically, and going, you know, I have to turn around and face these people. And I remember standing up, turning around, you know, obviously bawling my eyes out, but trying to be the patriarch at the same time. And the chairs are full. It's standing room. And there's people outside the windows of the funeral home. And the hallway is also full. And I'm just like, wow. Like, I didn't even know. Right? Like, I knew, but I didn't, like, wow. They're all here to pay their respects because this is the impact that my dad had. And then I immediately self-evaluated and was like, mine's not big enough. There's more. And like, that was where the initial seed was planted. You know,
I think the next podcast is on legacy.
Oh, legacy, man! You're speaking my language for sure.
I think it is, and you, it's so important. I've never seen a banker behind a hearse, and I've never seen a U-Haul following a hearse either. Yeah, and it's hard, right? Because we get fixated day to day, and I think we need people to pull us out of the swamp of life.
Because great analogy.
Yeah, that's really good.
The heart of man is broken. Yeah. The heart of man and woman is broken. Mm-hmm. We are so intertwined and so connected through social media and all these things and cell phones and all this stuff, where a conversation or human interaction isn't what it used to be.
So true.
We don't want to talk to a stranger on the street. I hate that. I hate
I still do.
Well, we know you do. You love talking to random folks on the street. We know that. But you're a rare breed, Natasha.
I'm gonna take that as a compliment.
It totally was meant to be. It's hard because, you know, the heart of man, I think, has decreased, and we're so apt to put stuff out on people or spread rumors or talk about each other. And I know this is going to sound like a feat to say this, but I wish we could fix the heart of man. I wish people would say sorry more. I wish people would apologize more. I wish people would accept, you know, heartfelt, you know, I hate that there's so much hate and discontent in this world where it eats people. It eats people because they can't say I'm sorry. It eats people because people can't accept that apology. And I think you see a lot of lack of progression in people in especially in business, where it's like, I've just been burned. I've been burned too many times. I'm done. Yeah. And I think perseverance and resilience in that instance is so important. And I just, you know, to everything you've said, I wish there was a magic wand for this, to reference our last podcast.
Yeah, it was on Disney. Have a magical day.
Nice.
Listen, we're going down a rabbit hole and I love it, but our time's up, folks. So we gotta to be continued to the next podcast episode. So we'll do more on resilience. We'll do legacy. Desi, thank you so much for your time. This conversation was fabulous. Steve, thank you for being you and moderating today. Great job. Love it. And all of you listening, please check out more of our podcast. You can do that on our website, tngdefense.com. You can find just the audio if you don't want to watch on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. We just appreciate your time. And as always, if you have any topics that you think would be great to be addressed, we'd love the feedback. So Desi, thank you again for being here. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you, Steve.
Thank you.
Appreciate you too.
Hey, these listeners, go take action on one tiny thing. That's all.
Okay. Take action. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.